the Construction Record. I'm digital media editor Warren Fry, and with me today I have
Rene Marcos.
Rene is from Alice Technologies, and Alice Technologies is to do with AI and construction. He'll explain it far better than I could. But first, I'd like to go into how you got into the field of AI and construction in the first place, Rene.
That's a good question. So I think I got into construction because my dad was in construction, and he gave me a good piece of advice. He said, study anything you'd want, just don't do construction. So I was like, great, that's exactly what I'm going to do in my life. And so I liked it. I like building things. It's funny. I never liked school, but I'm now an adjunct professor at Stanford University. So I guess that's kind of God punishing me for the not liking school. But I didn't like the structural analysis so much, but I really liked to be on the construction sites. I thought that was fun. Like building big things was cool. And so first job out of school, I was in Afghanistan. I was 22, and they gave me at one point I had 114 people that I was managing to build things, and I didn't think I was very good at it, and so I thought, let me go learn how the pros do it. I ended up doing a PhD at Stanford, and sitting in Silicon Valley, if you're working on something, inevitably you're gonna start using algorithms.
That's where I was going to go next, how AI fits into all this, because it's more of a buzzword now, but up until only a few years ago, AI and construction were not things you heard together in the same sentence, but they are now. So maybe you could go into how you got involved with that.
Oh yeah, I mean, when I started my PhD, people were like, that's the dumbest thing in the world, like a PhD in construction management, like, you're going to be unemployable, like you're going to make less money, right? People would not think of applying AI to construct. Like, I started in 2009. I remember when we raised our first round in 2015. I think it was like, I would say construction tech, and the investors' eyes would glaze over. I had two meetings where the investor was like, "Look, I don't want you to 5 minutes into the meeting, they're like, I don't want you to waste your time. We're not going to invest." And I was like, okay. So yeah, you're correct. Like mixing AI and construction was definitely this sort of very novel, like can't be done thing. Whereas now today it's I'd say almost mainstream, right? But yeah.
And what do you think, besides your own company, what do you think drove that adoption to the mainstream? Is it perhaps the fact that the older generation is starting to retire and a newer generation is more comfortable with it, or is it other stuff, or is it both? Is it more besides that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I spent a lot of time trying to think about it. I think that there's several factors that led to what I call kind of the construction renaissance, right? The rebirth of construction, which I think happened really, if you were to put a year on it, I would say 2017, right? And I think that the reason that in 2017, and if I got my facts straight, the venture capital, I think, jumped by 30 or 40% into construction tech that year. And I think the reason that happened is that there's a confluence of factors that have come together that mean that the problems that we are solving in construction today weren't solvable by computers 10 or 20 years ago, but they are solvable by computers today. And so I think that, simply put, the machines have caught up to our field. And so I think that another factor is that the input to construction, which is design, right, got digitized. BIM, right? So in that, BIM's been around for a long time, but I think it started to become mainstream and call it 2015-ish, right? And 2015, I think, is when there's the input to construction has been digitized. So now we can go digitize construction, right? So that's sort of, I think, the reason for it.
What you mentioned, problems that machines couldn't solve and now they can. What are some of those problems?
I mean, take a typical construction project, right? So, you can schedule probably 80% of the jobs in the world with between 500 and 6,000 tasks. Kind of an interesting, thought, right? Look, there are schedules we've seen of 140,000 tasks, right? And there are schedules with 10. But if you want to schedule a construction project, somewhere between 500 and 6,000 tasks is a good bet. If you're looking at 6,000 tasks, right, you're looking at what we've identified. We've identified about 14 constraint types. 6,000 tasks, 14 constraint types, 614 constraint types, across, call it 700 days.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the sort of number of variables that you're looking at, right? It's not doable by the human mind. It's just not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the size of problems that the computer needed to crunch, right?
Also, we all know that construction is slow to adopt this kind of stuff, and they use stuff like Excel and Microsoft Project and other things that are that's a lot of human data entry. How does Alice Technologies in particular, how do they address that? And sort of, do you work with those formats and sort of adapt to what you need, or do you sort of do it your own way?
Oh, it's a good question, right? I think that people would say the same about manufacturing, right? If you look at manufacturing, I don't know, in the 1920s, yeah, manufacturing was this field where, why would I want to do that? Work in some dirty factory, and it wasn't very sophisticated, right? But what Alice is doing for construction, as well as many other companies, right, is changing that. And so, when you say construction is not innovative, I don't know if that's necessarily true, right? Like research done at Stanford shows that actually when innovation in construction spans several disciplines, like mechanical, electrical, plumbing, architecture, so on and so forth, then the adoption is slow. But when it's, innovation in one specific thing, like, a machine that excavates, right, an excavator, the adoption is very rapid, right? And so that's one point I'd like to put out there. The other point I'd put out is that, like, the beautiful thing about innovation is it's available to everybody, right? And every single field has people in it that are willing to innovate and go the extra mile.
And so what are some of the projects that Alice has worked on, and then how are some of the ways that you've saved money for these projects? Because I'm assuming that's the whole idea, is to save money on a project.
Yeah, that is. I'd say that the value proposition of Alice is saving, money or time, right? There's a couple other value propositions. So Alice, is a generative construction simulator. It generate lots and lots of sequences and simulations on how to build something, right? Mm-hmm. And so what Alice does is it reduces the duration and the cost required to build something, but it also kind of processizes or captures, your means and methods, right? How do you build, right? How do you build parking lots? And so you can now put that into a computer, right? So that's sort of what Alice can do. We've worked on projects like the HS2, or are working on HS2, the high-speed rail in the UK, largest infrastructure job in Europe. We're working on several sort of oil and gas projects here in the US and around the world. So yeah, large scale, sort of 100 million and up projects is our sweet spot.
Are people becoming more efficient, which then helps you with the software?
Yeah, so definitely the software itself is becoming more efficient. There's no question, right? Mm-hmm. We're building, like, here's a simple example, right? One of the questions with Alice was that Alice requires the physics constraints, as we call them, supported by. And so back in the day, you'd have to do that manually. Alice now figures that out for you, right? Alice automatically groups, objects in your BIM model for you, right? Alice, the scheduling algorithm is becoming better and better, right? And so it's just becoming smarter in how it crunches those constraints. And so that's sort of, where Alice is improving efficiency. The software itself is becoming better. The projects that you build with it are also, much more efficient, right? Mm-hmm. In the sense that you have better cycle times or better resource allocations, for the software, for the projects.
And in terms of using the software, is it a dashboard, or is it something where they give you a pile of data and you guys figure it out and then you send back, here's our results, or how's that work?
We train the users, right? Interestingly enough, it's a relatively easy software to learn. There's not much to it, believe it or not, in the sense that, if you want to build a project, what the software asks you is like, okay, what are you building? That's like the first goal. I'm building a hospital. Okay, well, what does it look like? Well, here's a BIM model, right? Or here's roughly the, how many stories and the rough shape or size of what I'm building. Okay, what tasks and what resources do you need to build columns? What tasks and resources do you need to build slabs? Let me apply that knowledge to all the columns and slabs, right? What calendars do you want to use, right? And so, you know, anybody in construction, like tasks, resources, calendars, those are very familiar, um, you know, words. That's familiar, terminology, right? And so you set it up and then you start to simulate. And what's really crazy is that for the first time ever, you can build a project 20, 30, 40 different times before you need to build it.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of I think the in my mind the holy grail of construction, right, is that you can build something over and over again, before you need to build it,
Mhm.
right?
And avoid a bunch of errors that you would have otherwise made or could have made anyway.
Absolutely, right. I mean, imagine that you were building I don't know, a 10-story, apartment block, right? And
Mhm.
you built it once, and then you went and built it again. You'd probably have learned something from the first time around, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Imagine you could build it the third time, fourth, fifth, sixth, right? Like by the 10th time you've built it, you've probably got, a pretty efficient solution, right? So what you can do with Alice is you can do that. You can do that. You can build it before you build it, so to speak, right? Many,
Mhm.
many times. If there's a delay, you can also mitigate for those. You can, on average, find ways to build something 17% faster, and 13% cheaper.
And are there certain areas like, say, institutional or green building or other areas that this lends itself to more? Because I would assume, especially with green building, the whole idea is to keep it more efficient, more in terms of energy efficiency and the way you build things, and more making it more adaptable to surroundings, etc.
Yeah, what's interesting is that because it's a simulation, right? Like a lot of people don't realize that the software is, actually shuffling resources around, in the simulation to build your job.
Mhm.
So because of that, the side effect of that is that you can, look at the schedule, you can look at the cost estimate, but you can also look at the carbon emission.
Mhm.
What I'm trying to explain is that we didn't need to build like a separate carbon emission calculator. We literally like said, hey, since you simulated the project and you shuffle the resource around, assuming that this resource takes, this much carbon dioxide or emits this much carbon dioxide, can you just, output a graph that shows how much carbon dioxide was used, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay, and in terms of the future, what kind of new efficiencies can you see on the horizon that weren't possible before without this technology and similar technologies?
It's a good question, right? I think that the construction, like the construction industry, is getting digitized rapidly, very rapidly, right? And the reason that's significant, right, is that what's going to happen is that various parts of the construction ecosystem are getting put in the computer,
Mhm.
right? And so what I mean by that is that you have, uh, the supply chain, right? The labor, the equipment, the materials, the processes, the tasks, right? All of that stuff's getting put in the computer. And what, however, the bricks still have to go on top of each other. Like
Mhm.
the reality still exists, right? It's not all digital,
Mhm.
right? And I think that the communication between the two worlds is, I think that the biggest kind of frontier in front of us, moving
Mhm.
forward, right?
Okay, and if people are interested in Alice Technologies, where should they go to find out more?
AliceTechnologies.com.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks a lot, Warren.